Hi, my name is Jeff Adams. I'm the owner of Terra Sophia LLC, an ecological design consulting and education firm, and we're here in the backyard of the property that I am renting to look at some different strategies for permaculture and climate resiliency that can be implemented at a home scale, and then we'll be taking a tour to look at some other watershed scale strategies as well. So here, one of the first things to think about in terms of energy efficiency and resource use is the orientation of buildings. And this particular trailer was oriented with its long axis on the east-west axis so that it's really well designed for passive solar orientation. And what that means is that in the winter, when the sun's low, it pours through these windows, helping to heat the house, and in the summer a lot less light and heat gets into the building, helping to keep it a little bit cool. So that's a really great way to, just by simply the way that you orient your house and your windows, you can save a lot on your heating and cooling bills. So the next thing we really are looking at here is in permaculture what's called your zone 1, or we have this forest garden, kitchen garden right off the back doorstep, where it's really easy to go from the kitchen to come out to harvest some different culinary herbs, such as we have chives, rosemary, oregano, thyme, a whole fennel, a whole range of different culinary and medicinal things for us to eat. We're also standing in what could be considered a forest garden. That means that we are in a space where it looks and functions like a natural forest, but is full of multifunctional plants for both wildlife, pollinators, as well as human consumption. So some of our overstory trees, we have apricots, mulberries, Nanking cherries, choke cherries, peaches, apples, all helping to provide shade and create a cooler microclimate here down where it's where people are more likely to hang out and need a little bit of shade, especially in the heat of the summer. Then we have some lower story stuff such as currants, sumac, lilacs, rosemary, other small fruiting shrubs that are starting to fill in that next layer. And then we have a whole variety of stuff growing in the kind of ground cover and forbs layer, so that we're really using vertical space as well as horizontal space very efficiently in terms of packing it full of different plants and trying to really get a lot of ground cover so that we don't have bare soil, we don't have a lot of loss of that potential to harvest solar energy and have plants converted into different products for human use, as well as cool, fresh air, all these other ecosystem services provided to us. So here we are standing next to Arundodonyx, also known as giant reed. It is considered in Utah to be a noxious plant that requires you to either eradicate it or control it. And so on our property here, we are choosing to control it by harvesting it annually to prevent it from going to seed, as well as managing its spread so that it stays in this area. And we actually find it to be a very beneficial and multifunctional plant when it is not out of control in our waterways. So here it's helping to provide a windbreak and visual screen from the properties and from the neighboring properties, and it is also a very great building material and multifunctional plant. Once you've harvested it, it's a great source of biomass. So I'm standing under arundo archways that are created to both help prop up vegetation to increase windbreak and privacy, as well as we're starting to trellis vines up this side. We have some cucumbers that are just barely starting to get going this season to grow up the other side, so it's becoming a structure for additional vertical plant growth. We also use it as bundles to help create erosion control and little terraces on hillsides, so that we can then backfill that with some soil and have a nice flat terrace to plant into for next year. And another great use of it is a lot of native bee species are solitary cavity nesters, and they really like to lay their pupae or larvae into the open ends of different canes and stuff. So here's a small native bee habitat house that has a little bit of occupancy going on in the holes in the wood, and we have some other spots on site where native pollinators have laid their pupae into the ends of the arundo as well. All right, and so here we are on the top of the property on the edge of a ridge line here. So while before we were down in a nice forested, shadier spot, now we are up in a full sun microclimate that gets a lot more sun, wind, so different plant palette, things that can handle a lot hot, drier climate, and really trying to again promote that multifunctional pollinator planting. So we have a lot of stuff for people to eat, but also big swaths of flowers for our native and local pollinators. We're also trying to build in habitat features, so we have logs for bird perches, different cane bundles for native bees, rock walls and rock bundles for lizards and other creatures, because we're really trying to create a diverse ecosystem where nature creates its own checks and balances so that we have to do less work in terms of pest management and keeping our plants healthy. Another thing to note up here is I'm standing on what was dug out as a root cellar from here all the way down there, about 8 or so feet deep, and then over the course of about 20 years, all of the brush and trimmings from the property were piled up in here just as something to not haul them to the landfill, not burn it, sort of make better use of that carbon and that organic material. And so we compressed that, worked in a little bit of sand, and now we have this giant sponge here that stays wet through a good portion of the summer and has a whole bunch of different biological activity, fungal mycelium, all these things that really support healthy plant growth and tie up that atmospheric carbon and that biomass into a carbon sink on property instead of putting it back up into the atmosphere. So really trying to shift that carbon balance here.
My name is Jay Nethercott, and I'm the property owner. We're on the south end of Moab, up on top of Rocky Road. And anyway, so this is a project that we started last winter. And if you'll see up in here, the arundo that we've used as sort of a base. And then what we do is mix that with reject sand or rock dust is what I like to call it. It's kind of a combination of rock powder and rocks, tiny little rocks, and then we mix that with the arundo, or oftentimes with these chips, with these wood chips right here. And it makes a really nice nutritious combination, because when those wood chips start breaking down inside of this stuff, which is the waste sand, you can get it by the truckload, it actually turns into a really good topsoil. Yeah, the idea here, the theory, it's just a theory, but I think it'll work, is if we can connect the water table, which is in the bottom of this drainage, as evidenced by this cottonwood tree here. You know, I planted that cottonwood tree, 15, 20 years ago, just stabbed it into the ground because I knew there was water down there, evidenced by all this vegetation. And then there's willows down below, and watered it a little bit at first, and then it just came up on its own. And so you can see that it's pulling a lot of water out of the groundwater. There is groundwater down there. And so the idea behind these pathways is to take that water and start drawing it up this desert hillside. And our plan is to get it all the way to the top eventually, and I think that using this method with these pathways and connecting with trees and vegetation, you know, start at the bottom and move towards the top. And I think that we can completely revegetate this hillside and improve the hydrology and you know, and create a micro habitat here, good for birds and deer, and we've got rabbits, and there's some, I've seen some peregrine falcons living around here, all kinds of bird life. They love trees. Organic material acts like a wick, like in a lamp, and if you can just get a good solid coat of it, you know, like up this hillside, it will eventually rehydrate. And I think that's one of the answers to pushing back the desert a little bit, which I think is an objective that we all need to focus on, because deserts are growing around the planet, and we need to come up with strategies which will curtail that.
So here we are in the bottom of the Hidden Valley drainage in the channel that really only runs maybe once or twice a season during the biggest of monsoonal storms, and has over the years, over the centuries, down cut a lot and caused the localized groundwater and soil moisture to drop as well. So what we are trying to do here is bring the bottom of the channel and the associated water table back up higher so that it has more area and more storage capacity for the nearby vegetation. And so what this structure is called is a one rock dam, and that's obviously not because it has just one rock, but because it's one rock high, and it's built in a way that is extremely stable, in that you start at this downstream end with those rocks almost at grade, so you eliminate that power of falling water that's erosive, and then we've maintained the channel shape, which is really important, so that water flows over the rock structure instead of around it and potentially undermining it. And then it has that ramp shape from downstream side to upstream side, so that that water gets pooled up on the upstream side and then can lose a lot of its energy, drop a lot of its sediment, and raise that channel back up. The other really key thing with these is that we seeded underneath the rocks, and what that does is starts letting vegetation grow up to provide long-term stability and help to revegetate this channel. And the rocks perform a few key functions with that. One is that they're concentrating more water, so when it does rain or when the channel does flow, more water soaks in between the cracks, because if you were to look down on this, you'd see that there's maybe 80% rock and 20% crack. So we've effectively got 4 or 5 times as much water going to those seeds and plants as compared to if there were no rocks there. The other thing that the rocks really do is they create a nice safe microclimate where deer and rabbit and other animals can still eat some of the plant, but they can't get all the way down to the base, so that you always maintain a stubble height of between 4 and 6 inches, which is really healthy for plant growth and root growth, which then feeds more root structure into the ground, making those plants even more resilient to drought conditions in between rain events. The other thing we're trying to do here is reconnect the floodplain. So you notice on some of the side banks there's these level shelves, and that's nature's way of dissipating energy in a channel. When the channel down cuts too much and can no longer access its floodplain, all of that energy dissipation gets used by further down cutting and degrading the channel. So we're trying to reverse those trends, raise the channel, hold more water in the system longer, so that it's available for plants growing on the banks and can be wicked up through capillary action and pulled up by vegetation through hydraulic lift, to see if we can connect the top of the ridge vegetation with this bottom of the arroyo vegetation.